Yeah, I am stuck on this project. I had a tree go down last summer, and so I was going to make the tree trunk into a bench, but it's just something that it's not quite fitting in here. It's not coming together like I had hoped. So I thought I would share it with you before I take it out, or I'll maybe do the finishing touches, follow through with what I planned on doing, and then share with you in a year maybe how this turned out. If nothing else, my hope is that I can give you some ideas and maybe something you can do in your landscape. How this all got started then, we had a Swedish aspen go down in a thunderstorm with heavy wind. And before I got it cut up and removed, my wife had commented it was kind of nice to have a bench available while she waited for our little bandit to take care of business. Bandit's not quite as rambunctious as this anymore, but you get the idea. Yeah, he's a character. So the wheel started spinning, but I didn't want to just have a tree trunk laying there. And since we already have a theme going in our landscape where we're using these rusted metal pots for our flowering annuals and a few ornamental trees, I decided to connect the tree trunk by cutting a hole into one of the extra ones I had. After getting the trunk pulled off the main path, I realized the empty pot I had was too narrow, but then I remembered I had a Japanese maple die on me, another one that was a little bit wider. If you're curious how I overwinter these container plants, I'll put a link in the description box that shows you the whole process. So I got the dead maple dug out of the pot and moved it into place. I decided to shorten up the tree trunk just a little bit, and since the wheels were spinning on this project, I'm going to show you a little bit later what I did with the section here that I'm cutting off. I use a lot of rock edging in our landscape, so it's quick and easy when I want to make changes to my borders. I'll just pop these out of here, make a level area, and cut a new trench after the container's in place. Once I had it mostly level, I decided to give it one more tug to keep that path as open as possible. Okay, everything's in place, so now I'm just going to mark the area, get some of this soil out of here so we can see what we're doing, grab that Sawzall and get this opening cut out. The Sawzall didn't work as well as I had hoped since the metal's so soft and flexible that it shook it too much and it was impossible to make a clean cut on my marking. But it established a rough enough hole that I was able to then grab my tin snips, and that did a nice finish cut along the mark. And then I just bent back the jagged edges with the pliers and cleaned up the remaining sharp points with a file. One of the things I've definitely learned over the years working at garden centers, helping people with their landscape projects, is overcoming the fear that something might not turn out so great, that you might have to start over, you might have to take it out, but there's only one way to find out, and that's exactly what this project is. So I guess I'll likely take my own advice and see this project through to completion. Let's go ahead now and get back to the present day and see where we're at with this project. My wife did a great job on her part of the project. She added that hibiscus in there. Down here we've got, looks like some calibrachoa. That's soft purple. And this is one of our new favorite. This is Mizu. Just a dynamite little annual that we're using in quite a few different planters now. Okay, so my idea then, I want to plant a shade-loving ground cover in here. This area does get a little sun in the early morning, but it's mostly shade for the rest of the day. And rather than purchase new plants, I do have a few options where I can make divisions from plants that I already have growing. Snow on the mountain, it's a good one for sun or shade, but it can be quite invasive, so you've got to be careful there. This little patch that I've got growing, it's in a really dry area, so you can see some of the scorch that's occurred on the leaves late summer. Lamium, it's another perennial that grows in shade to part sun, and it can also get a little aggressive and spread, but it has a nice variegated leaf and showy flowers. I believe this is a variety of Japanese Pachysandra, or Vinca it can be called. It used to cover a large area in this bed. It's mostly died out now and the area has been taken over by this icy blue juniper, but that's another great option. And one other option I may go with is dillweed. Yeah, the dill you use in pickles. Now I'm really starting to think outside the box here, but we have another bed where dill started to volunteer and come up in areas I really had not intended it. And you know what? I really kind of like the look of it. One of the other things I'm struggling with is the pathway here. Let me show you the angle that I'm talking about. One of my main traffic patterns is coming out of this back garage door down this pathway, and it's just gotten a little bit too congested for me. Unfortunately, the angle of that tree trunk is right there. I did pull it out a little bit, as you noticed when I was talking about how this all got started, but I wish I could have got the angle you know, something more towards that viewpoint. Unfortunately now, it's kind of facing some of the more, well, utility type things, wheelbarrows, trailers, etc. So I think we're kind of stuck with the angle, or I'm going to have to completely uproot it, which is something I was trying to avoid in the first place. But I think the solution might be to take that little lamb hydrangea out of there, even though I cut it back every year, and it just has such an extensive root system under it now that it just comes blasting out of there and gets a little bit too big now, draping over. But if I were to take that out of there, I think this path would be just a little bit more open, and we get just a little bit of a weave going through there. I always like the curves in landscapes. And before we wrap this up, let's quick mention what I did with that log that I cut off to shorten up that bend. I had this shepherd's hook laying around, but we weren't using it since we get a lot of wind and they're usually not stable enough to stand up on their own. So I ended up cutting it in half and using the fork as an anchor, and then just drilled a hole in the top portion of this log. Since the log has a wider base, it helps support the pole and it adds a little rustic look to the feeder. I also placed it here to continue the theme of that rustic tree bench, and it's viewable from my office studio where I spend a lot of time in the winter. I thought I had maybe outsmarted the squirrels at first, and they were having a tough time trying to climb up that narrow pole, but they figured it out pretty quick that this was an easy vertical jump. But it turns out they're an awful lot of fun to watch too. One of the great things about doing YouTube videos, it does motivate a guy to finish projects and start projects for that matter. This one's a to be continued for sure, but I appreciate you stopping by. We'll see you again next video.